Welcome to the She's Bold podcast. I'm Beth Whitman. Hey there, and thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the She's Bold podcast. This is episode number 98, if you can believe it. It just has gone by so fast. I've got a special 100th episode coming up, and I'm excited about that. It'll be kind of fun. Today's guest for number 98 is Dina Bennett. Dina is an author, travel junkie, and she's unorthodox, as she says. We'll get to that conversation in just a moment. If you are new to the show, this is where I feature conversations with women who have inspirational stories to share. These are women who have accomplished great things in their field of excellence. They've overcome adversity. They've taken chances. They've pushed themselves to their limit. Now, some of these women may be familiar to you, such as Samantha Brown from the Travel Channel or singer Dar Williams, while others may be less familiar or they just may be completely unknown to you. What they all have in common is that these women epitomize being bold. Now, what I've learned over the years, I guess not only through my travels, but also through other pursuits like working out and running, is that when we hear stories about other people's successes, we hear about their triumphs and their obstacles, it makes what you want to do seem possible. So you realize that success doesn't magically happen for people, and there's a lot of hard work that goes into it. To me, that is really inspiring. It gives me reason to not give up on my own dreams. Now, I truly believe that we all have the ability to become better versions of ourselves. There's no doubt. And I'm hoping you'll find pearls of wisdom in these conversations that inspire you, that motivate you. I don't know, maybe they shine a light on your pain point, that thing that makes you want to change and make choices in your life that make you happier and more fulfilled. Now, before I tell you about today's guest, who is definitely going to inspire you, I want to give a shout out and thank you to my Patreon supporters. These folks enjoy the podcast and show their support with a monthly pledge of $2 or more, just $2 a month. I have just added some additional levels that each include their own set of benefits, and that includes some fun Be Bold swag. Now, by supporting me, you're helping me bring this podcast to you most weeks and to help cover costs of editing and hosting and basically just kind of keep the lights on, as they say. You can check out shesboldpodcast.com/Patreon for details. One other brief note, if you don't know already, hopefully you do, I run a tour company. It's called Wander Tours, WANDER Tours, Wander Tours. And I've got all sorts of things happening over there. If you're at all interested in travel, please check out the website at wandertours.com. I just announced the inaugural Morocco trip and it sold out within hours. And that has caused me to start looking into extra dates, some added dates. So I'm looking at some other tours for Morocco. So if Morocco is on your radar, please let me know as soon as possible. I also just announced our 2020 dates for our co-ed Papua New Guinea trip, and that includes a very special tour that's being led by National Geographic photographer Allison Wright. So if you're a photographer and you love to travel, this trip is definitely for you. I'm also working on culinary tours to Santa Fe and Seattle, and those are both women-only tours. Those will be the early part of 2020. So lots going on. You can check out information. You can check out all those tours at wandertours.com. Okay, so on to today's conversation. Dina Bennett landed on my radar years ago when I was sent a copy of her book, Peking to Paris, Life and Love on a Short Drive Around Half the World. And this documents her trip as the unlikely navigator in an antique car on a motor rally. So obviously, Peking to Paris. And that was maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And although we did meet briefly at a conference, it was probably a year before her book came out, I think. We met at a conference. This was the first time we really got a chance to sit down and chat. And I have to admit, I was thoroughly charmed by Dina, and I so loved this conversation. When we met way back, Dina was living in Colorado, but she has since moved to France. Poor gal. And she's been there for the most part for the past 2 years. Dina is the author of 2 books, including Peking to Paris, as well as her more recent book, A Travel Junkie's diary. And I'll link to both of those in the show notes. But Dina is so much more. She's an expat. She's a globetrotter. She's a navigator. She's a rancher. She's a road tripper. Really so many things. Perhaps most importantly to me, she describes herself as someone who more often than not says yes rather than no. And I just love that about her. That's such a great attitude to carry through life. I could go on, but really what I want to do is I want to dive into this conversation because I know you're just going to love this. This was just so much fun. This is Dina Bennett. So I don't think that we as women always talk about things because maybe we devalue what it is that we're doing, or, we don't think it's important enough, or we don't see it as being bold. And so therefore we just don't tell our stories.
I think that's absolutely true. In all of the ways, all of the questions that you just posed now are, in my view, correct and worth exploring. But certainly that women do tend to personally devalue what we do in comparison to what others do, whether it's other women or other men. I don't think it's just one or the other. I think we are taught subliminally or actually that while we should do our best is not necessarily something that's sensational. And we don't easily learn during our younger lives how to evaluate for ourselves on our own account what we are doing and what we want to do. So if you continually put yourself in comparison to others and say, relative to this person, I am more or less beautiful, more or less fit, more or less smart, more or less accomplished, you lose really the ability to simply understand yourself as yourself and compare yourself to yourself.
Well, it makes total sense. Do you think men have the same issue?
I don't think men think about it.
Really? Not you?
I don't. I think it's the rare man who puts himself in comparison to others and judges what he should or shouldn't be doing based on that.
That's a big wow for me because I never considered it. For one thing, I just assumed that was also the case for men. So I never even questioned it before. That's an interesting thing for me to ponder.
I know I said it and I firmly believe it. And I've seen it in every car rally that we've done. The instinct and the reaction of the women who are, yes, mainly women in their 50s, let's say 50s and above, because you need a certain amount of time to do that sort of trip within your life. Every woman posed questions that no man ever thought of posing.
Can you give me an example?
The what ifs of the day. What if we run into an Asura Day march in every village in Iran? Will we have to do detours? Should I plan for that? I'm the navigator and that's in this car and I need to figure out the route. I know where we should be going, but what if it doesn't work out?
Well, do you think that those what ifs come from a place of insecurity, or do you think that they genuinely come from a place of planning because we are responsible for so much, the big we, like, children, family, husbands, caretakers, that we household, that we have to be aware of all that. And so that's just another piece of it. And it makes us the good navigator.
Both. I think there's, on the positive side, the element of planning, which is a good thing. But there's also the element that comes from a little bit of worry, one could say, or anxiety, that I want to show that I can do this right, be the best, in which case I should be asking questions. What if that car gets through before we do and we can't follow them and I'm left on my own? A little bit of the uncertainties of life coming up and wanting to show that you know what you're doing and you can handle it. I really do think it's both. Maybe, probably the most competent navigators are more, I hate to genderize this, but are more of the I'm simply going forward and managing this, and whatever I do will be correct because I'm doing it and I know what I'm doing.
And you think that's more of a male trait, would you say?
Yes.
Oh, is that what you're getting to, I guess?
I do.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think you find it more in men than you do in women.
Mm-hmm.
Because no man is told to be bold.
Because he just is.
He just is. And so this might be a generational thing too.
Mm-hmm.
And, I was born pre-Title IX, but I benefited from much of Title IX by the time I got to high school. Still, it was in its inception.
Mm-hmm. Title IX being the sports, like kind of leveling the playing field in terms of sports. Is that right?
It was the very superficial summary that whatever monies public institutions put into sports for boys, the same amount had to be put into sports opportunities for girls. So the girls would not be sent to art class while the boys were doing the team sports,
right,
which is, such a wonderful thing, and playing baseball. So I had lots of opportunity for sports as I went into high school, not in elementary school. But still, girls, we have centuries of girls being girls. And we're just at the very tip of the iceberg when it comes to how do girls mature into women who simply take as fact that they can do what they want to do. Feminism didn't bring that. Feminism opened a door, but there's a tremendous amount of history. And look at Me Too. Look at Me Too. Mm-hmm. If feminism had worked from the get-go and just transformed our cultural ways of viewing women and women's opportunities, Me Too wouldn't be happening. It would have been gone a long time ago. And it's not. It's still there. It's endemic in our culture, in our society, and in many. So, girls have to strive to be bold and to find ways in which we incorporate that into our worldview. And by worldview, I'm saying as much the worldview of me as myself or you as yourself as worldview, world as a whole.
You have on your website, I noticed a couple of times, a description of yourself as a tomboy. Did you realize, was that very purposeful, or did that just happen to show up a couple of times, like in your about section, or just some information about you?
It's purposeful because I feel that I was very fortunate to be raised by parents who, without any feminist manifesto presenting itself, because they were from Europe and they were quite, let's say, advanced in age for their generation when we were born, my sister and I.
Both of your parents are from Europe?
Yes. My mother's from France. My father's from Austria. Both felt that we should do whatever we wanted to do and whatever we could do. And like a lot of suburban kids, we had a lot of lessons.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up outside of Manhattan.
Okay. So
in Westchester County.
European parents in the New York City area, and they're fostering this boldness in you, this tomboy, or just this confidence that you can do anything.
So remember that at the time that I was growing up, let's call that the early 60s to the early 70s, and I went to college in 1973. There weren't a lot of sports team opportunities for girls. Girls went to Girl Scouts. And my parents didn't grow up with the Girl Scout tradition. They grew up with hiking and skiing in the Alps. That was not something special for them. They lived near the mountains. They went into the mountains. So they created that lifestyle for us too. On weekends, we would go hiking. We would go skiing. We would go biking. And when I was in 10th grade, my father said, I want you to have outdoor survival skills. So he sent me to the National Outdoor Leadership School, which back in 1971 was
nobody knew what that was.
Yeah, it was a real tough thing to do. But for my parents, that was normal. So I didn't grow up with a sense that I should not be doing things. I did grow up with a sense that I could do anything I wanted, and still I struggled. It took me a long time and a lot of work just on myself to get to the point where I felt I am who I am, and I can actually say yes to whatever I want to say yes to, and I can make it happen.
What do you mean that you struggled with that?
Well, in school and in life generally, and certainly in work, even in the classroom, for all that in high school and college, you can encounter great professors. You also encounter just the run-of-the-mill teachers, and they don't help you to take pride in being who you are.
So you got maybe some flack or some pushback on what you wanted to do and who you wanted to be by...
I wouldn't put it in those terms, Beth. I don't feel that I got pushback. I don't feel that I necessarily got tremendous positive feedback. I mean, there's two. There's an absence of, and then there's a presentation of. And I didn't get that presentation of, you're marvelous, you go ahead and do it. I felt that I had to make it for myself. And I didn't realize that. You have to have some perspective on your life to understand that the direction you've been going is not really using you to advantage. I've always been very successful, but I never recognized how successful I was until I retired. And I looked back on what I had accomplished and I thought,
because you weren't comparing yourself to others. Right?
okay.
If you
Well,
had,
yeah.
well, I mean, if you had been comparing yourself to others, you would say, yeah, look at the successes I have compared to so and so. So maybe you were just going forward and doing your thing and not being in a comparison mode, not recognizing your achievements, maybe for that reason.
But devaluing my achievements.
Okay.
I really do think that I devalued my achievements. I knew that we were very successful. We built a software localization company. My husband started it. I was in PR and marketing, and I joined him, and we really worked well together, and we built the company together into one of the top in the country. That's success by any standard.
Sure.
I had an MBA. That's a very particular, at that time, not completely female path to follow. But I still never felt, and this is it's not that I don't want to share it, but it's difficult to articulate exactly what the experience was. I didn't feel like I was standing up for myself and the sort of life I wanted to have. I was doing what was expected of me. I was successful in school. I had my MBA in marketing, international marketing. I went into business. We built a good company. All of this was expected of me. So it was external. And I was doing well at what the external definition of me should be. And I didn't feel that that got to the core of me. So I was not satisfied.
When did you realize that?
Very, very early on.
Like in your 20s, in your 30s, when you say early on?
I would say in my 30s. I was struggling already. Who am I going to be, and why? Why am I doing this? This is not satisfying me. Without feeling the compulsion that, let's say, somebody who's always known that they wanted to be a doctor, who says, I've always known I wanted to be a doctor, and then pursues it and loves their profession. I didn't love what I was doing. I loved being successful at it, and I wanted out.
And this was when This is when you were at the software company?
Yes.
Okay.
While we were building it and while we were getting kudos and being the best and signing up great clients who became great friends, I said, this is not what life has for me.
Mm-hmm. But you were in that for a long time, 10, 12 years?
12 years.
12 years.
12 years, yeah. And then we sold the company and we bought a ranch because we wanted to be outdoors. And my husband wanted to play with diesel engines. That's the short story of
He
it.
wanted to play with what?
With diesel engines. He wanted the real tractors.
Yeah, the factory equipment.
And the backhoes and the stack wagons for hay. And I wanted room for my horses and to be out of doors. Mm-hmm. I just wanted to be out of doors and around nature. And we just said, let's step in that direction and see where that takes us.
Mm-hmm. And how long were you on the farm?
It was a ranch.
This is the ranch that you have information on your website about the ranch.
That is the ranch that transformed my life, I would say. For 15 years, probably the best years of my life.
Mm. You're living in France now, and you look back at that as the best years of your life. Okay. A lot of people would be jealous.
You're right. Most everybody is jealous that I'm living in France, and I'm jealous that I'm living in France. I'm living a movie. There's no doubt about it. But I couldn't be doing the life that I have in France if I hadn't gone through the life that I loved at the ranch. Mm-hmm. And that's, again, not to say that it was always easy. Up until we did the Peking to Paris rally, about which I wrote the book, and we may talk later, I was completely lost at the ranch. So when I say it was the best years of my life, I mean that it gave me the space and the opportunity to reform myself. And I don't say transform because I think that I always was what I became. I just finally had to come to grips with it and say 4 or 5 or 6 years of being lonely and not having friends because we were very isolated and not knowing what to do with myself and realizing that all the things I told people would be my fabulous projects before I retired, and I retired quite young, worked at the ranch, but a different sort of work. I didn't want to do any of those. When I actually had the time, I just thought, nope, I don't want to be doing this, and I don't want to be doing that.
What did you do with your time on the ranch?
Well, we had 8 horses, and so I took care of the horses. I adopted 2 wild Mustangs from the Bureau of Land Management and trained them and became much more accomplished as a horse trainer. We ran the ranch. It was 2,000 acres, and it had 800 acres of hay, which had to be we won't say raised because it was natural growing grass, but it had to be irrigated, naturally irrigated through flood irrigation. And it had to be cut and dried, baled, stacked, shipped to people who would sell it. And because I'm the person in the couple who sells, I had to build a market for us. And I went about building a market to sell 1,500 tons of hay a year. And then we had cattle. We had 150 cows that needed branding and calving. And we had a ranch manager and a ranch hand and summer hands and integrating into a community. So there's a tremendous amount of work.
So despite the fact that you weren't for the 5 years, you had mentioned 5 years that you first got to the ranch and you weren't doing the things that you quote unquote thought that you would be doing in retirement, you still had a purpose there and you still loved it. Is that right?
I would not say at the time that I loved it. I knew that I wanted only to live there. But loving your life and saying you're in the life that you should be leading are two different things. I think that as women especially, we look towards like happiness and loving what we're doing as the only way to define what's positive. And I feel incredibly strongly that every emotion we feel is an important and a valid emotion and deserving of being felt and deserving of being expressed. And that to the extent that we say this is a negative emotion, that loneliness is negative, it's bad, I shouldn't feel it, or uncertainty is negative and bad and I shouldn't feel it, we devalue ourselves and we say what I'm feeling is not appropriate. I say it's all appropriate. And if you're scared, that's appropriate. And I would go out on my Mustang and I'd be scared out of my mind. And I would say, I'm out here by myself on the ranch. There's no cell phone service here. If I get bucked off, and he bucked me off a lot, I'm going to be on the ground and he's going to run home. He'll be fine. And I won't be. And what am I going to do about that? And I had to figure it out because I wasn't going to give that horse back. And to the extent I made it through that, not because I found a better way, but because I said, I'm scared and that's telling me something. And I'm going to make that into a different experience. Note, I don't say into a positive experience. I say into a different experience. Then I moved forward and I became a better rider. Sometimes I walked my horse home, but that's a solution. That's not a humiliation. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I do see what you mean.
So the first few years that your question was, I loved it. No, I didn't love it. I struggled.
So why did you stay? Because most people, when they make a change and they don't love it, and they thought they might, I'm assuming that you thought that you might love it after being in this business for so long and having your head completely in that for 12 years and thinking, okay, great, we're going to get out of this. We're going to sell the business and we're going to go live on a farm. This is going to be great. And you get there and it's not great. A lot of people would have just made another change and said, let's find out what is great. Let's move closer to the city, or let's move somewhere else, or let's make some sort of change. Let's turn it into a bed and breakfast or something so that we can have more connection with the outside world. Why didn't you make a change?
There is the notion that whatever you are experiencing in one place, to the extent that you don't continue with that and see where it leads you in that place, you're just taking those same questions and dealing with them in some other location. You're not changing the question, you're changing the place in which you're asking it. And that doesn't necessarily advance you. That's sort of the soft out.
I know in recovery circles like AA, they'll call it pulling a geographic. So if you want to, if you're a drinker and you live in New York and you want to change your life, then you go to LA, and in theory, making that big geographic change, you're going to change your life. Of course, you bring yourself with you.
Yes.
That's the unfortunate thing.
So if you continue to externalize and say, well, if I surround myself with different opportunities or different people, I will then have the chance to transform me. I say, no, I am the one. And I'm an atheist, so I don't think there's a God up there who's going to be helping me. I think it's me who's going to make things different in my life if I want them to be different. We did explore possibilities. We did explore, should we make a bed and breakfast here? And would that be interesting and fun for us to explore? Should we create an artist's retreat and a writer's retreat and invite creative people to come and use 1 or 2 bedrooms in our ranch and stay for a month? But each time we went in one of those directions, I thought, but that's just masking what the issue is. Because the issue is me, and I need to do something about that. I need to just live with this discomfort that I'm in and see what comes around the corner and be able to say, I don't know what I'm doing and be okay with that. And in fact, if you've ever tried that at our age, having been very accomplished in whatever you do, you know how difficult it is not to have a title and to see people's eyes glaze over. Before I could say I'm the executive vice president of ILE, and people would go, oh, and their eyes would light up. And when they would say, after I lived on the ranch for a few years, well, what do you do? And I would say, well, we live on a ranch and we have cattle, and their eyes would slowly close because they couldn't figure out what that said about me. Am I Republican? Do I drive with a rifle? Who am I? What am I? They couldn't pursue it. And that was really uncomfortable. And that's when I realized I know who I am. I'll find out. And it's not going to come from the person across the table or at a cocktail party nodding and going, wow, that's really great. Mm-hmm. It's me who's going to have to figure out that path and find for myself what I think is really great. And that's what the ranch allowed me to do. And that's why.
What did you find that was really great about you or the situation, or what changed for you that you stuck it out and you got to know yourself better and then kind of figure out, oh yeah, I'm getting the hang of this. I think I can hang out here for more years.
What was great was that I had stepped off of not the accepted path, the expected path that I had been on, and I was starting to build for myself. And it's only when I started to build for myself that I realized that I hadn't been doing that before. So, true, as I said, I was pretty young. I was in probably my mid 40s to late 40s. And I was at an age when most people are really either firmly ensconced in raising their families, and I didn't have kids, or in maturing their careers to where they want to be when they retire. And I started to see how exciting it could be to create myself and to be able to stand on my own 2 feet, but really to feel solid on my own 2 feet and feel that if I took one step, I didn't need to know what came next. That I could build a path for myself that would lead somewhere that would be right for me. And I didn't need to be able to say to people, regardless of what they wanted, I didn't need to be able to say, I'm going over there to that horizon or to that door. I just needed to be willing to move in some direction and even to move backwards if I felt like it.
Well, this to me circles back to how we started this conversation about women comparing themselves to others and to a certain extent having the right story to tell to people, because that's what it is. That's comparison, right? If you tell a story about yourself to someone, you're feeling either more or less confident about where you are in your space. So you're telling people that you're a rancher and you're seeing their eyes glaze over, and there's a bit of comparison there. Oh, I'm not the CEO that I was, and I'm not the CEO that you are, or the executive that you are. So there's that level of comparison. So it sounds like you came to a place where you didn't need, that you were comfortable in your own story, that you didn't need to tell someone that what you did and then get validation from them.
That's true. It became less a question of what my actions were and more a question of what my substance is. So sometimes even my husband, Bernard, and I, we would say, well, what did we do yesterday? The days were often indistinguishable at the ranch. It might be that you were waiting for a backhoe to arrive to dig up a cable that a beaver had chewed through. And they didn't know when they were coming, and you would hang out at the house. Mm-hmm. It wasn't all fun and games and excitement. But over time, I came to a place where, in retrospect, I realized that my discomfort with what was going on in my life had led me to a place of greater confidence. I never said, I have to become more confident. I'm lacking in confidence. Mm-hmm. That never occurred to me. I'd accomplished great things, and I was already feeling rather brave, and I had my horses, and I would go out by myself, which many people consider inconceivable. But, sometimes you go walking in a marshy area, and you pick some grass, and it's hollow inside. Mm-hmm. And on the outside, it looks very substantial, but you open it up, you break it, and you realize there's nothing in there. And I felt that I was that sort of grasp that I was very substantial on the outside to people because they could comfortably define me for themselves. But inside, where they couldn't see, there was nothing there. And I had to find what could fill that up.
That's really interesting. And in filling that up, were you able to fill that up on the farm?
I got to the point where I realized this was something that I needed to do and wanted to do. And progressively, yes, my life on the ranch, and I always differ from you on ranch and farm because farms, people say you plant things, and ranches you raise things.
Okay, good. Well, thank you for that. Yeah.
Ranching country in Colorado is ranching country for them.
Thanks for the clarification. Yeah.
The ranch didn't give me everything. It gave me the opportunity to embark on a life where I got to where I am now, living in France and feeling that I am I feel very Oprah saying this, but a fine version of myself. Mm-hmm. It was definitely the ranch that gave me the space and the time to do that, and the difficulties.
Was there, you had mentioned earlier in the conversation that it had come through a lot of work that you had done, like I'm assuming on yourself.
Yeah.
What form did that take?
We talked a little bit about it already, the acceptance that I wouldn't have a title, that my satisfaction in myself would come from myself, that I would become a person who would say yes to whatever came my way, regardless of whether I felt I could do it. Even if I just created a fine story for myself to convince myself that I would go, like with the Peking to Paris rally, where I said, why am I doing this? I get car sick. I hate being in a car, and now I'm going to be in a car for 35 days. What possessed me? But it was let's see what this experience will bring. And it wasn't a la-di-da sort of, happy-go-lucky. Sure, I'll go do that. It was really with a sense that well, let me put this a different way, that, as you say, being bold, or let's call it being brave, comes from an understanding of what you yourself would not perhaps do if an opportunity didn't present itself. There are what I call the extreme adventurers, and they go out and they seek their adventures. I don't really seek them. I'm simply open. And if somebody says, come run a marathon with me, I'll go, but I have ankle tendonitis. Well, let's figure out a solution for that. Okay. Let's just start. And there's no saying where it will lead me. It might lead me to the end of the marathon and the finish line. It might lead me to learning that what I really love to do with my feet and my legs is tap dance. I don't know, and I don't need to know. And that's what sort of being bold and being brave is, saying, I don't need to know what the outcome is before I start. I'm simply going to be a person who will always say yes to starting.
Do you think that some of that is bringing maybe European practicalities to your life? Because I know you're American. You are American,
I am
right?
American,
Okay.
yes.
You are American, and we are so driven. We are so goal-oriented that I don't want to say it's unfathomable to me that you would do something for the sake of doing it. But I find that if I have a goal, then I can get somewhere. If I have a marathon in place, if I have a business goal in place, if I have something written down, what task, whatever it is, that I can work toward that. But if I just say, well, I'm going to do this and come what may, then I'm not as motivated to do it.
I see what you're saying, and there are definitely activities that are difficult to accomplish where you have to say, this is my goal. And I agree with you. If I wanted to run a 10K, for instance, I would say, this is my goal. And I'm going to get in shape to do it. And by the XYZ date of the race, run, whatever it is, I'm going to be there at the starting line and I'm going to finish it. So I will define a goal like that. But it's also a goal to say, I am going to become a person who is defined by and dependent on herself. And that's not to exclude others, because I'm very dependent on my husband too. We've been married 36 years and we meld well together, and he does certain things and I do certain things, and I count on him. That's it. Counting on someone it's part of commitment, but it also is a dependency on them in, let's say, a positive way. You're trusting them. I wanted to trust myself. That's a goal, isn't it? To build of yourself a person of integrity, and where that integrity is through and through. in terms of what you yourself want to be and what that enables you to do. There are things that I do now that I couldn't have done in the first 2 or 3 years at the ranch. I just wasn't that sort of person. I really wanted to be. That was my goal. I couldn't have said it at the time. I couldn't articulate it, but what I was working toward was to be a person of utmost integrity to herself.
And you worked on that on the farm.
I worked on that. And I stumbled. And it's a sort of thing where I couldn't say, I know where I'm going, because my purpose was not to read self-help books. I didn't feel that there was somebody out there who could tell me the how-to of doing this. I wanted to figure it out for myself, because that's part of what integrity means to me.
Did you journal or write through this process?
No.
See, I find that if I'm journaling, and I've talked about this before on the podcast, I find that if I'm journaling, then I can see a progression. I can see a pattern. As I'm writing it, I can see the pattern unfold. And I can reflect back and I can remember. Maybe it's just because I have a terrible memory. So I have to go back and say, what was I thinking 6 months ago? That's how I process. And I have read the more self-helpy books. I think I've gotten away from that a little bit, but the journaling I find really is helpful.
And that is what you should be doing then. I've written 2 books now, but I was not somebody who had written books when I started on this, and I wasn't planning to write a book. I've never been somebody who journaled. I'm someone who works best by letting thoughts come and go, and eventually I reach an epiphany or a decision, and I am very decisive. I don't waffle much. And in a certain sense, I wasn't interested in looking back, which is not to say that you look back and say, oh, this worked and this is how I felt. But I wanted to be sort of resolutely forward-looking. Where was I going, not where had I been? And that's the way I am. And I don't advocate it for everyone else by any means. But it's part of that process of saying, I'm going to become the person who I want to be, who I feel is the most full me. Part of that process is figuring out how to do it. And you try different things. You definitely try journaling, try dream interpretation, try many things until you find the way that seems to encapsulate your way of processing information. This whole notion of me doing certain work and being uncomfortable and why was I doing it, I couldn't have defined it at the time. It was, I was just a walking question mark. It's like, what the hell am I doing here? Why am I going through this? What's it for?
You stuck it out for a long time to have that question.
Well, I had my
mind.
animals. I love animals. So I had a life around me that I absolutely thrilled to. I love nature. And I loved being out watching moose and their calves and seeing those calves kicked out a year later as yearlings, watching sandhill cranes come back every year, watching beaver dams come and go and learning about beaver. It was heaven for me. So nurturing and so fulfilling. I didn't want to be anyplace else. And I gave up a lot to be there. I gave up everything that was considered normal in life at that time. You figure the late 1990s and all the way through 2010, 2013. Everything that was happening in the world, I was up in the mountains and I wouldn't have wanted to be anyplace else because I absolutely love being in nature. That's just, as a friend of mine in Bend says, that's my heart place.
I find myself just kind of thinking about you and the acceptance of yourself. I find myself sometimes having to make a decision, and I do think it's maybe not very conscious, but there is something in my mind that says, what will people think?
Oh, absolutely.
And it's so subtle. Sometimes I go through this in my own decision-making process where it's very subtle, but I think there's something in the back of my mind that thinks, what will people say if I make this particular decision? And gosh, let me just, like as an example, it might be, I'm going to stop running. Let's just say that.
Okay.
Let's pretend we're in a make-believe world.
Okay.
We're in a make-believe
Not
world.
a revelation here.
No. I'm running a marathon this weekend, by the way, so that's not happening, me stopping running. Maybe I have an injury, or I just think, gosh, I'm just really bored with this and I need to do something else. But my gosh, I've just built my reputation over the last few years on being this person who runs. How could I ever give that up? Or maybe I'm not at all. Maybe I'm a great cook and everybody knows that I love to cook. And then suddenly I just get tired of it. And I think, you know what? There's a Whole Foods going in 3 blocks away. I'm going to start eating all my meals at the hot food bar and the salad bar there. And I'm going to stop. But I've built this reputation on this. So that's the part to me that makes decision-making difficult. That it's that outside judgment or what other people might think or say. And John, my husband, will come in and say, who cares? Just do it. Just do what's right for you. It makes total sense. But it's more difficult than that.
So it's a really good example or idea to ponder because we all face that. I face it. So, for example, my issue was I'm the Colorado girl. I've lived in Colorado since 1977. I'm associated with the mountains, with horses. It's how I spend my time. It's what I love. Everybody knows that. And here we moved to France. Now, I didn't lead the charge to France. That was developed by my husband, who is French, and he wanted to go back and live in the culture that he's familiar with. And I figured you sort of say, I gave it the office. He lived in this country for 45 years. He deserves to go back. I'm staying married. I'm going with him. And I'm the Colorado girl with horses. So how do I make this happen?
Are you living in Paris?
No, I live in Provence.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm
well,
sorry.
I know. Well, I told you to come visit. I have 2 horses still, and I'm going to take them with me. People do that. I'll just set them up in Provence near our home. I'll figure out how to do that. I'll find a stable, and I'll ride them there because I am defined by my horses. So I guess
you define yourself.
I'm defined by others by my horses. I define myself as someone who always saw herself as riding even to the point where it would be a winch that would lift me up into the saddle because I couldn't move. I would always be there with a horse by my side. I love what horses contribute to my life. I didn't let that stop the decision making. But at the same time, I do see myself as a person at this point who can adapt and be flexible. That one decision is neither irreversible nor so all-encompassing that it doesn't leave me any wiggle room. And there's nothing wrong with wiggle room. If you're a runner, you stretch, you remain flexible. Well, in terms of life, you remain flexible. And that goes back to the saying that there aren't negatives. So if you say Whole Foods is coming in down the road and I'm going to start buying foods there, well, you do it. And then you see where that takes you. And maybe you decide, I missed the shopping. That shopping time actually was thinking time. It's not food shopping. It's reflection for me. Nobody's bothering me. I'm squeezing the tomatoes, and I'm thinking about what I'm going to do for my next new trip. And then I go home, and cooking is relaxing for me. So you discover things, is what I'm saying. I wound up giving my horses to my close friend in Colorado, where I knew they would be happy.
So you ended up not bringing your horses?
So I am the person who doesn't have horses anymore,
mm-hmm.
which I thought I would never become. Am I unhappy? No, I'm really happy. Did I ever expect to reach a point in life like this? Never. Would I change it? No. I moved ahead. I moved into a new place. And that's invigorating.
I thought you were going to say I moved to heaven. I thought, yeah, you probably did.
I moved to heaven, and that's invigorating. And horses will take on a different meaning in my life.
Are you happier? So you've been there 2 years full time in Provence. Are you happier at this moment living in Provence without your horses than you were when you first moved to the ranch and you had all your horses and you had everything there? You had all the animals?
Good question. It's a similar situation because the ranch was a complete change of life and lifestyle for me. And moving to France is also a complete change of life and lifestyle for me. I'm living in French. I speak French very well, and I did when I moved over there because my mother's French. I have a French passport, so dual nationality. And I have a French husband, so that helps. All of those things help a lot. Still, I had to make my own life there, didn't I? I had to meet people who related to me. But everything that happens when you move reflects back on you. And what I can't do in French is speak with the clarity and the eloquence that I can in English. And so nobody knows me there as the person who's very funny, who's very particular and pithy with words, who makes her living.
Because you're not.
Because I'm not. So then what am I? So again, I find myself
interesting.
Redefining myself and finding in the reaction of others to me a view of myself and incorporating that into me and saying, where am I going now? I don't have the horses to occupy my time. I don't have the ranch. I don't have Americans around me. What is my next step? And I would say at this point, I don't know. And that's exactly where I was in 1998, 2000, saying, I don't know. But then I was uncomfortable with it. Now I'm very comfortable saying, I don't know.
Just because of practice. And you know that whatever is down the road, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay.
Yeah.
It seems to me that you're a very thoughtful person and you're not reflecting through journaling or through a meditation practice, which I'm assuming you don't, because you didn't bring that up. But you need space for the kind of thoughtfulness that you have. Would you agree with that? And by
physical space, do you mean? Or
no, I mean mental space.
Yeah.
I mean quiet time.
Yeah.
And that is something that most people don't give themselves these days.
Yeah.
The journaling thing is my forced kind of downtime mental space. Like that allows me to say, okay, every day I'm going to journal. So I am going to sit down in my chair and I'm going to have that time. And because otherwise everything else is flooding in. Emails and texts and Facebook messages and anything else that's going on, that's all just flooding in.
Yeah.
But it sounds like I can only assume that you are taking the space, whether it's through gardening or sitting at the window, sipping a cup of tea and giving yourself that time to reflect. Is that accurate?
No.
Dang it, Dina.
No. And that's a problem. Well, I think what you say is 100% correct. You need space for that. And so if you think of physical space, I had that at the ranch. And part of the difficulty of coming back into what I will call normal life, living with people around me all the time and stimulus, cars going by, stores and all that, is training my mind how to manage that and how to exclude stimuli. That's a difficult thing for me to do because I never had to do it in my life. I was either working and very, very, very busy, and then I would retreat up to our house in the mountains because living in Boulder, you can live way high in the mountains at 8,000 feet and have just quiet around you, and then you can go into work, half an hour's drive, and it's easy. Now I don't have that. I live in a town for the first time in my life since I was in the MBA program in Boulder. Since then, I've never lived in a town. And I struggle with the amount of input that I get without seeking it. Before I could go out and I could seek input, then I would retreat. Now it's there regardless of what I do. And that's a lot of busyness that tires my brain. Mm-hmm. So I do get my space, and I would never have explained it the way you do. And I like the way you explain it. I cycle, and I've questioned why it is I want to go by myself, because I've been asked to cycle with other people. And generally, I love to have a companion with which to do my riding, my horseback riding, or my hiking, or my walking. Especially with women friends, there's nothing better for me than to take a long walk with a close friend and just to be able to talk without sitting across from each other. Just walk forward, listen to the birds.
A walk and talk.
Yeah, this is my favorite thing to do. So I cycle almost every day where I am, and I'll go for an hour or 3 hours, and the freedom of that, the wind and the need that I have just to be quiet, that's where I find it.
You do find it. Yeah, you do carve that out.
I do.
Okay. That makes sense.
And I need it. Yeah.
We all do. I just think we don't realize it. Like, I don't know how people can live in New York City with the constant bombardment there.
You don't think that people learn how to tune that out and how to select what they want to get involved with? I don't have that facility. That's what I've realized. I never developed it, but I think people do in New York City. You have to.
Yeah, I have a judgment about that. And I grew up just outside of New York. So,
Okay, where did you grow up?
In New Jersey. And
Oh, okay, the other side of the river.
yeah, yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So Bergen County, North New Jersey. No, I have a judgment that it's not possible to just tune that stuff out. I think maybe you become hardened to it, but there is something about it with like kind of that white noise. I mean, I'm sure it just becomes white noise, right? But that can't be really healthy for a person's body or spirit.
Okay, can I go somewhere with that that's related to travel?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. People ask me, because I travel a lot, and I travel in an unusual way in a car on rugged roads. What is your favorite country? That's it. People, it's a very easy question.
Mm-hmm.
And I always think carefully about that. I always come back to the same answer, which is India. And most people are they're not horrified, but they're a little aghast. And they will say, oh, I could never go to India. And I ask why. And they say, oh, the poverty. And I try to explain that when I travel, the country is as it is. I'm not going there to change it. That's another form of travel. And I have done volunteering in India and worked with women there and prostitutes and etc. But that's not my reason for traveling. My reason is to experience a country as it is, not how I wish it would be. And so if you think about living in New York and hardening yourself, then I also wonder whether people who might just be starting to travel, the way at a certain point I took this leap of faith from all the traveling I did as a kid with my family, going to Central Europe and staying with their relatives, a comfortable and very pleasant way to be introduced to travel, to the sort of traveling I do now, was saying I'm not hard and fast with my rules of what I need to get from this trip. This trip isn't supposed to give me something. I'm going out there and I'm inserting myself into other worlds, and I'm living that as that world is, not as my world is back home. And as you said, I wonder if people harden themselves in New York. It just made me think, how do you start on travel? Because a lot of people are hardened based on whatever is around them. That's the shell is, I'm comfortable here where I am. I can define it all. I know what to expect and how to react. And that is a sort of a peaceful, comfortable feeling for me.
Well, you actually bring up a really good point. And it's a different path that I thought than I thought you were going to take when you brought up India, because India is not unlike New York, New York City,
right,
to me. That
I can see that.
You're bombarded with people. It's like the people and the noise and the pollution and the car honking and the poverty, but also the beauty, right? New York also, to a lesser degree. And yet people do well, living in India, and it's probably all white noise, background noise to them. But what I always say about India is that, you can go to India and you can hate everything about it. And believe me, there are a lot of people who go to India and they hate everything about it and their experiences. And the vendors are in your face and the tuk-tuk drivers are in your face, and it's so draining. Or you can go and you can have fun with it and you can accept it. And that says more about who you are than it does about the country or the people of that country.
Right,
and it's the same with New York. And I go to New York. I can only do New York in small doses, and I don't think that I could live there. But my going to New York and my experiencing New York and my judgment about New Yorkers says more about me than it probably does about New York. And you can go and you can have one experience. Like I have friends who live still in New York and New Jersey, and they're constantly posting photos on Facebook about all the plays that they go to see and like how much fun they're having. And that was never my New York. That, I've been to a couple, but that's not my thing. But that's what they love about it, and that's their world. So
and that's why they live there,
exactly,
and you don't.
Right, right, yeah. So, and I don't want to knock New York. They have great pizza.
Yeah.
No, I don't want to knock New York. I just am making an observation that I don't even know how I got down that path, but that it just seems to me that it can't be like having that constant input. It's got to be really difficult.
Well, we were talking about finding a space,
right?
And how do you find space? And it made you think of how does that happen in New York? So I segued into something else entirely because I was thinking of how do people get into the traveling overseas? What does it bring to people? I now live overseas. In a way, I've gone sort of the final step in the adventure. And instead of just traveling there and then going home, I now live where I used to travel. And how does one even go about doing that? That's also an interesting question. How, if you decide you want to live overseas, of course, it's a whole vast world. How do you go about making a life for yourself? A real solid, full life. And I think about that a lot because I'm living it. And because the village where I live is one that attracts not only that village, but the whole region where I live attracts a lot of foreigners, a lot of British who love to come to France and establish there, but also a lot of Americans. And I don't want to build an American life in France, yet I'm known as somebody who lives there. People come and we meet in a cafe or they start to talk to me. Oh, you're American. I'd love to get to know you better. And I had coffee with one couple who were just leaving to go back to their home in the States, and they have a part-time home in our village. And the woman, and I respect this couple tremendously because they are very thoughtful people towards others and also in how they lead their life. She said, "What do you like about your life here?" And I sensed in that question a searching for what I might say that she also could either explore and see if she liked it, or she could nod her head and say, "Oh, yes, I found that too." And that would be a sort of a pat on the back for her that she had chosen something good. And I refused to go there. And I felt momentarily mean about that. And then I said, no, this is what I'm going to say is fine. And what I said is, there's nothing in my life that will tell you what you will like. You will find that. If you are the sort of person who decides she wants to make a life here, you will find what you like. And I'm not even going to go into the conversation of what I love here. It's what I love. And it's not to do with you. And I don't say that in a you don't deserve to know way. Not at all. I say it in a you are a brave person to come here and try to build a life. Go forth and fill it with your own images.
It does sound a little mean, but like that, the response to that, but it's kind of the same thing. I mean, the way you said it was not mean. I don't mean that. What I'm thinking is people ask all the time, what's your favorite destination? And why do they ask that? They ask it probably because they want to put something on their list based on what you like. I'm not so sure that it's a genuine interest in what you actually like and appreciate most in a country or a destination.
Yeah,
I don't know.
That's a good point. People look at you, of course, as tremendously experienced in travel, Beth, and you are. And they may have limited time, limited resources, and so they want to know the best place to start. But that the question that they're asking is not really what they're asking. They are not, as you say very correctly, asking what do you like and why. They're saying, could you advise me on what I might like? They're just not asking it the right way. And I turn the question around and I say, are you looking for me to help you figure out where you might go? And they'll usually go, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way to find out why they're asking.
And then I will say, well, let's explore that, and I start to ask them questions and help them parse out where they might start to investigate. And then I say, go look into that a bit, and then let's talk again. And so I send them off to do some research.
Yeah, it's when I answer, it's kind of like what you said earlier, like the eyes glaze over, because I think the answers that I give are usually destinations people have never heard of, or they don't know where they are.
Yeah, but that also, that can be a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Because you have, by the nature of your work, put yourself in company with people who are curious about travel and have probably just de facto traveled less than you and in different ways than you. And they're coming with you because they value what you may be able to expose them to, which then could lead them to do more of that, either with you or on their own, or to discover that it's not for them, but to discover it in a way that doesn't frighten them or worry them too much, whatever the feelings might be. There are plenty of places in the world that I haven't heard of, and yet we've driven from Istanbul to Calcutta, through all the stands, through Afghanistan. I've been twice to Iran, north, south, east, west. I've been to Armenia. I've been many, many, many places. And there's still so many places that I've never been to Papua New Guinea. I think eventually I could figure out where it is on the map, but I'm not sure. But I travel because I want to know where places are on the map. And that's what I say to people. There's no shame in not knowing where someplace is. It's exciting. My gosh, you don't know where that is. Go.
Yeah, let's figure it out.
Yeah.
For the record, you can't drive through Papua New Guinea, so
it may not be
of interest. And you know what? That's actually a good place now that we're about an hour into recording, which has just been absolutely delightful for me. I love this conversation. And I knew that when we spoke on the phone the other day, we met at a travel blogging conference years ago.
Yes.
When it was in Colorado. And I have absolutely no memory of that. Just letting you know, I have figured this thing out where I have to meet somebody at least 3 times before I can remember like a face or a name. I'm convinced that it's something like neural that is going on that I just have to have this imprint, and I embrace it now. I used to be really embarrassed by it, but now I just embrace it and I admit it. And I know other people are like that too. They have that thing where they can't even recognize a face at all.
Yeah, I know people like that. Well, just in your defense, I will say that when we met, I was still living at the ranch. I had a very long single braid down most of my back because I had very, very long hair.
Yeah.
I was a horsewoman. And so I looked a bit different than I do now, since this is radio, I have short hair, very short hair.
Yep. Well,
so
I would have recognized it was all in the hair. Yes. Anyway, so we had met many years ago and we've stayed in touch, and I read your book, Peking to Paris, and I loved it. Really, really enjoyed it. I had so much fun reading that book. And so, we've stayed in touch since then. And I'm so delighted that this all worked out. You're in town for a wedding this weekend. And so finally we get to actually meet. But we had this great conversation the other day on the phone. And I just knew from kind of the very similar philosophies and thinking around travel and around women's perspectives. And I don't want to say aging, because I don't think of myself as aging, and you're certainly quite youthful. I don't think of you as aging, but I think that there are struggles that women have. And I tell this all the time that I ran my first marathon at 50, and I talk about it a lot because I want people to know that post 50 is not downhill. There's still a lot of great things that we can do in our lives. And with so many technologies and so much talk about the length of our lives, I think people are going to be around for a lot longer too. So we better not just accept the fact that as a 50-year-old, you only have 20 years left in you, or however many years left in you, because I think we've got a lot more than that. Well, there's people talking about living to 120, 150, 180.
That scares me.
Yeah.
Yes, but right.
Yeah, well, why not? As long as we can do it in a healthy manner, why not?
I think it's a wonderful way of thinking, and it's a difficult way of thinking, because we do tend to project at each point in our life what the horizon can be for us. I think that helps us say, all right, I'm now 22, I'm graduating from college. My next horizon is, let's say, 30, by which time I hope I'll be married and have kids, let's say, or I hope to have advanced well enough in my career that I can buy a house. So we put those horizons and they become somewhat goals to us. And it's only as we get older that those horizons are viewed as limitations. So, for instance...
What do you mean?
Well, you might say, I am 50 or 55, or I am 60 or 65, and since my best years are behind me, because in 10 years I'll be 75 and then I'll just be old and decrepit, or I could well be sick, so I won't do this or do that. I had this phrasing put in front of me, and it was such a jolt that I never forgot it, by a couple who were looking for an apartment in our village. And before we bought our house in this village, we had an apartment on the second floor of a steep staircase of an apartment building in the center of town. So when we sold it, they came by to look at it, and they said, no, it's not for us. There are too many stairs up and there's no elevator. And I said, oh, ha, ha, ha. And I have to watch my sense of humor because it's not for everybody. I said, but when you're older, it'll be exercise. And he said, well, that's not my point of view. In fact, in 10 years, I will be 75. And who knows what I'll be able to do at that point. So now I'm going to buy myself an apartment on the ground floor. Okay, fair enough. It wasn't my deal to try to dissuade him of that, but I thought, what a way to live life. In 10 years, you might.
He will, because he thinks he will. But so your point before about it being limiting, like as we get older, then it becomes a limiting thing. It doesn't have to.
It doesn't have to.
Right. But we are programmed that way. And I think the more people who talk about living to 100, living to 120, living to 150, there's a popular podcaster who talks about 180, then if I think that I'm going to live to be 130 or 125, I am going to make different choices today than if I thought I was going to live to be 70. I'm going to make much better choices because I want my body and my mind to be in better shape. And I think that's where we need to go, is that we need to start thinking the longer term so that we can make it happen. Because if we are limiting, like I believe that the vast majority of people, 95% of people have an age on their timeline, and it might be driven financially, or they're sitting down with their financial advisor who is saying, okay, well, realistically, if you live to be 80, then this is how much money you're going to have in those next years. So then you have in your mind that you're going to live to be 80. And if you live beyond that, you're going to be out of money. But if you have in your mind that you're going to live to be 125, as someone that I had on this podcast actually told me that she was going to live to be 125, and more power to her. It's Deirdre Walnick, and her son is Alex Honnold, who did Free Solo.
No kidding.
So Deirdre told me, yeah, I'm going to be 125. I've got a lot of things to do. She's 67, and she started climbing 10 years ago when she was 57. Big inspiration. So people are talking about this. And if you talk about it, you can plan for it and you can be healthier. But if you think that you're going to kick the bucket at 70 or 75, you're going to plan for that. And you're not going to have a house that has stairs where you're going to get exercise every day. Because this gentleman that you talked to, he could be exercising every day and then make a different decision at 80 when he can't do the steps anymore. But he spent those 10, 15 years doing those steps
as if
and being
he were 80.
Better. Yes.
So what if we put a slightly different spin on that and say it's not the amount of years, that's not the conversation. The conversation is learning how to say yes in life instead of saying no. That it doesn't matter the age. It doesn't matter the number of years because we don't know, do we? That's a question that nobody can answer. It's a sort of a woulda, shoulda kind of, I should do this and I might do that. It's the what ifs, and we can't answer those what ifs. All we can say is, right now, I put words in this man's mouth, I love this town. My wife and I are healthy. We can afford it.
Perfect. Yeah, that's a perfect
and let's
example.
do it. And then we'll see. Whatever happens next, we'll see. And we trust in ourselves enough. We are competent enough that we will be able to react to whatever it brings when that comes. But let's not cut off the nose to spite the face now, saying let's restrict ourselves because in 10 years we might.
Right.
Or in 50 years, I might. That's not the conversation I want to have.
That puts it in great perspective. As long as, someone's going to hear this and say, yes, I'm going to say yes to that bottle of wine every night, or to the 6 croissants or whatever it might be, where they get themselves in an unhealthy habit, but I see, but what you're saying is making it a positive decisions and taking advantage of the moment because you don't know what the what if is down the road. If you enjoy something and you
see that it's an opportunity for you,
yes,
then trust yourself to go with it. Don't stifle yourself. So this is something that comes up really strongly when you move to a new location. If you're moving because you want to add to your life, not to change your life, that you're not trying to use the move as a way of solving your problems, because those problems are still going to exist with you wherever you go. But if you move and you say, I'm going to say yes to everything that is offered to me, I'm not going to judge based on the activity, on the person's looks, on the time of day, all the things that I use to create my life around me in a place where I'm known and I know. I'm just going to say yes, and I'll see what's offered. And some of it I'll like and some of it I won't, but none of it is a waste. That's another way of saying, I trust myself. Things will happen. Whatever happens, happens. And it's, we used to call them happenings. It's happened. It's not a regret. It's happened, and it's there, and then you deal with it, and then you move on.
Where did you get that positive attitude from? Was that something that was instilled upon you as you were growing up?
No. So, I'm certainly not the first one to say that. And I don't read self-help books, and I don't write self-help books in that obvious how-to way. It's something that I came up with for myself. Maybe I read it in a column somewhere, and eventually I reached a point in life where it made sense to me and I decided to use it. I don't know. It just seems like the sensible way to be. And I've reached a point in my life where I feel it's the only way to be. If I look back on my parents, they definitely were people who could act because we are Jewish and they were refugees in World War II and they had to leave their homes, but they also were able to leave their homes. And they were people who could make decisions that they would leave, that they would come to the United States, that they would reunite here. And that's another podcast, another story, and that they could make a new life. And there was, millions of people were displaced by that war, and millions of people continue to be displaced, as we know. It builds a certain type of resilience. People respond in certain ways. My parents respond by being doers and loving America, being proud to be Americans, while never losing their Europeanness, their Frenchness, their Austrianness. But they never actually said, this wasn't a dialogue that would have happened in our household, be positive, go out and do what you want to do. They simply did. So perhaps I learned somewhat by their example, or by the subconscious notion that flows through refugee households, and we were surrounded by them, of making a life for yourself. But I at the same time feel very strongly that I came to be a person through lonely times and through uncertain times in my life, and working through that, a person who says, I'm great. Mm-hmm. I am what I am. Now, that doesn't mean everybody likes me. Most people don't. But I am what I am, and I am happy with myself.
Well, I have a hard time believing that.
I'm proud of myself. I appeal to myself. I am what I want to be, and I built it. That's what I built it. I didn't look to somebody else to tell me how to do it. I did it. And that's what showing up every day is. You show up in your life and you say yes.
That would be a great place to end it because it's such a positive note. But we didn't even talk about your Peking to Paris experience, which is what I thought we were only going to talk about today because I was so fascinated by it.
But this is good. And I love to have the opportunity to delve into how do you, from wherever you are, whatever point in your life, single, married, widowed, with big family, with no family, moving, uncertain, certain, how do you move into a space where you become proud of who you are and you take the chances that mean something in your life? So we've talked about a bit of my life, a bit of your life, Beth, but my life is mine. And what I like to say to people is maybe the newness for you is going into that bar that you've always walked by on the way to the store where you buy your tomatoes, and you look inside and you say, God, who are those people? I don't have anything in common with them. And you go in and you sit at the bar and you order your glass of water, your juice, your beer, whatever it is, and you talk to the person next to you, because that's what you do. If you were in Papua New Guinea, not in the bar, you would talk to the person next to you and say, isn't this exotic? And see what they say. See what happens. Build your experience around you. Say yes to something new right where you are. You don't even have to put any money into it. And see where that takes you as a person. Then you'll be the person who had this great experience in the bar that you've known for 20 years and never darkened the door. Maybe you'll go in there the next day too. There's so much right around us. And that's what I write about. That my experience Peking to Paris, or in Travel Junkie and all the travel stories that are in that, those are wonderful stories that I love being able to share. But the point in sharing them is not to say, go travel to far off places yourself. The point is to convey to people that right around them are all the stories in the world, all the exotic, unusual people that they could ever want to come across.
It makes me want to go just hang out at the coffee shop and have a conversation with someone. Yeah. Before we started recording, we were chatting with John, and talking about our conundrum. We love our neighborhood. We've been here for 17 years now, I think, in our neighborhood, and we love it. And one of the difficult things that's happened in Seattle is that we do have so much traffic now, because I don't know what the statistic is right now, but we were getting 1,000 new people a month coming into the city. And when we walk a lot, and we get to know our neighbors through our walks and all the kitty cats too. But when we go for walks, this one time we were counting all the new apartment buildings that were just like within blocks. And there were like 800 to 1,000 new units that we could count. So we've got a lot of people. Luckily, we both work from home, so we don't have to go out and get into the traffic. But we used to venture out more. We used to go to neighborhoods and go to their art walks, and go to their markets and that sort of thing. And it's just become a little drudgery because we don't know the travel times, and it's kind of a pain in the butt to do that. But it was a good reminder as we were chatting again before we were recording, as we had this kind of similar conversation of, well, like, so how do you bring that? How do you kind of get past that and look at it as an adventure? Or we could take the water taxi and go downtown and do things that are a little bit different. The staycations, as it was a term used much more frequently a few years ago. But doing things in our own backyard and really appreciating that. And we do embrace that. I mean, I go out for my runs, and that is such a visceral way to observe the neighborhood and the changing of the neighborhood, and, see who's coming, kind of who's working on their garden and who's out walking their dog and that kind of thing, and saying hello to people. And that for me is a really beautiful thing to be able to experience that. But it is really important. And again, a reminder for us is to kind of get over that hump of being a little bit lazy. For me, it's being a little bit lazy.
Yeah. But I mean, you also have to give yourself cut yourself some slack, let's say, because you have a lot of change in your life. You travel a lot, which means for me, being able to be energetic for travel means having stability and comfort at home. I'm a big believer in my comfortable nest, which doesn't mean that it has to be lavish. It's just where I am where I let everything hang out. I don't have to be anything. And to be open when you travel, you have to build up the energy for it. So for instance, I've found that I'm putting so much energy into creating a new life in France that I don't have the energy for travel. We've taken a few trips. India, we were in Vietnam and Laos, we were in Armenia. And on each one, I got off the plane and I was instantly exhausted. And I realized I can't open my mind to this right now. My mind is full and my spirit is tired because I'm giving everything I have to creating the best life that I can in my home. And that home has a purpose. It's your base. It's what's familiar. And I think we need that. And to the extent that you have it, you're very fortunate. So yes, you could stay here and you say once a week, this is going to be the day in which I talk to somebody I don't know, or I go someplace I don't know. And you just make that part of your life. But I'm not in any way saying destabilize what you have.
No, I hear that. Yeah.
It's just that for those who find they want to experiment with how they start this notion of saying yes to things and just taking a step down a path they're not familiar with, what I want to convey is that you don't have to go far away from home to do that. You could set yourself the challenge of doing that right near you.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen the movie Yes Man? I've talked about this on the podcast before. Go watch it. It's Jim Carrey.
Whom I love.
Goes, you see, I wasn't a big Jim Carrey fan until I saw this movie, and now I have to watch it at least once a year, where he goes to a seminar, where it's like the Yes seminar, very Tony Robbins-esque. And he's tasked with saying yes to all opportunities that come up, and it transforms his life. It goes sideways for sure, but it's just brilliant. And I think about that a lot. Like, so do I want to embrace these things and say yes to them? So that's a lot what it's like.
Okay.
So is there anything that you want to chat about? I mean, like I said, this was not, I thought we would dive into some other things here, but it's totally fine that we haven't, because I think that there's a lot here in this conversation for people to pick up on. And I think, one of the things that you talked about is and really have stressed that this is my Dina, this is my life, and this is how I've done things. You need to find your own path. And when people listen to these conversations on the She's Bold podcast, I want them to find inspiration and like gems of wisdom that they glom onto, not to replicate necessarily, specifically, but to be able to think about what's possible for them. And I don't think everybody should be out running a marathon. I don't think everybody should be a plant-based eater, which I'm primarily, except when there's a croissant from Bakery Nouveau, which you discovered. Which one did you have, by the way?
I just had a croissant.
Okay. Well, they have this.
Because I'm missing home.
I know. Well, they've got twice-baked chocolate and twice-baked almond.
I saw them. I considered.
Oh, my God. They're fantastic. So anyway, I don't think that anybody has to be the way that I live, but I hope that they take away something that says, yes, okay, so I can just live a more yes life and be bold about it and be bold in the decision making. And that's what I think the key is. And I think that's what you have conveyed, is that everybody has their own talent or interests that they can incorporate to make their life bigger.
Yes.
I think that's what it's all about. And you have done a great job. I think probably maybe more than any other guest that I've had a conversation with, because that's how you're living. You're living your own path, and you've come to terms with that. I mean, you've had to go through a process to figure that out. Yeah,
I mean, that's true, and that's exactly what I've valued in this time, is a chance to talk not about the actions and the fun travels, and there are certainly plenty of stories, and we could spend another hour exploring those if we wanted to, but to actually take a step back and say, how does one make one's life into what one wants for it, regardless of what society says one should do in it. And that being bold isn't a tremendous leap of faith. It's a small step from wherever you are. And intrinsic in the word step is movement. If you take one step, you have moved and you're in a different spot than you were before. That's what being bold is. Makes me cry.
I always ask guests what it means to them to be bold, but you just answered it, so I don't even have to ask that to you. But you're absolutely right. That step is a move forward, and it might be a move back at some point.
It's movement.
It is movement. And it's always, it's one step forward, two steps back. Maybe two steps forward, one step back.
Yes. Sideways.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it is movement, and that's the important thing. So where can people find you online and your books?
2 books, Peking to Paris and A Travel Junkie's Diary, both available on Amazon or can be ordered through Barnes & Noble or any indie bookstore. Mm-hmm. Any indie bookstore can get them. They're distributed throughout the United States. And I have a website, dinabennett.net, through which you can communicate with me. You can contact me. I love to hear from people. I will always respond, and I respond quickly.
Do you keep up with your blog on there?
I blog when I travel, and I have made a decision recently that I am going to stop the continuous blogging when I travel. It's become an expectation that when I go someplace, people will be able to read stories of it. And I've felt that the obligation of writing has changed the way I travel and has me searching for stories rather than simply experiencing what's happening around me. And so I'm taking a step back from that blog. I'm not shutting it down by any means, because I'm a storyteller at heart, and I will always see surprising things that I then want to share with people. But I'm not going to promise that each trip I take in the future I will announce, nor that I will write anything about it.
I have a different but similar story in terms of how my travel has changed. I bought a camera last fall, I think it was. And for years, I had been carrying around a lot of camera equipment. We're talking like 20 years ago, like image stabilizer. I think I had a Canon, like pounds and pounds and pounds of equipment. And then everything switched over and went small digital. And then for a long time, I was just using a camera phone. And then I got inspired and I bought a camera, a Sony RX10 IV. It's called. It's an all-in-one. So the lens is not detachable, and it's like a 70 to 600 or something crazy. It's amazing. And it has changed the way I travel because I spend more time and I take things in more and I reflect on them. At the end of the day, I download my photos and I go through all of my photos and kind of relive the moments. So it has slowed me down and made my travel much more meaningful. It's really interesting how that's worked. So discovering new things. It's great. Dina, if you want to get away from your family, and not that you would want to, but if you need another getaway while you're in town for the wedding, come and we'll chat again and we'll just focus on
I wish I could. I would love
driving.
to. I would love to.
Well, next time you're in Seattle or when I come to Provence, because, I hear they have great croissants.
You're invited.
Thanks so much for today. This was fabulous. It was really great.
Thank you.
Wasn't that just great? She has such a positive outlook on life. It's so inspiring. I mean, what could be better than just saying yes to everything? It's just great. You can find Dina at dinabennett.net and on Instagram at Peking to Paris 07. For those links and for links to all the things we chatted about in this episode, go to shesboldpodcast.com/episodes, and there you will find the show notes for this and all of my other conversations. You can also find those links and show notes in whatever podcast app it is you're using to listen to this. If you'd like to support the show and let me know how much you are inspired by these conversations and how much you look forward to hearing all of this positive information in a time when we're surrounded by kind of a lot of negativity, go to shesboldpodcast.com/Patreon. You can also sign up for the She's Bold podcast newsletter from the site's homepage, and that'll alert you each time a new episode is released. Don't forget to check out my tours at wandertours.com. You can connect with me by friending me on Facebook, and I'm WanderGal on Instagram. Ladies, you can join the Be Bold Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Be Bold group for support and encouragement for whatever ways you're trying to be bold. Thanks for joining me for another episode of the She's Bold podcast. And until next time, be bold.